Hey everyone, welcome back again for a new episode of Out of Band. And I can positively say that I am absolutely delighted for the conversation that we're going to have today. It is going to be about social engineering, and our guest that we have, she has the most awesome, ridiculous title that I've ever heard, Chief People Hacker. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So maybe it's good to give a little introduction on yourself, because
Sure.
the title already alludes a little bit, but maybe share a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Stephanie. Sometimes I go by my hacker handle Snow, but I've been doing social engineering professionally now for, I want to say it's been 8 years. It's getting up there. Came into cybersecurity from a completely different field, and have been just diving into it and loving it so much today. I lead a team of social engineers at IBM's X-Force Red team. And as you mentioned, my title is Chief People Hacker, which is a pretty fun one. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell.
Very cool. So like I already mentioned, for me, social engineering is actually a really interesting topic. For me, it's a topic that started my interest in cybersecurity. Like I read Kevin Mitnick's books on social engineering. It was really, really cool, and that got me further into the topic. But it is quite a broad topic. Maybe you can start with explaining what you think is social engineering, and also how did you get into this world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to define social engineering as convincing a person or group of people to do something that they typically wouldn't or maybe shouldn't do. And I know that is extremely broad, and it's broad for a reason. But when you look at through the lens of cybersecurity and how we do it as ethical hackers for our clients is we want to make sure that they are testing their employees, right, to see how they do and maybe track them over time, because that's really important. Think about if you were to roll out a new security awareness training program, right? You invested all this money, all this time, and you have your employees taking this to receive all this knowledge of the red flags and things they're supposed to look out for, and then we turn around and maybe a month later run a phishing campaign, and you know that number increases. So we really want to make sure that we're testing and tracking over time to make sure improvements are happening, or seeing if there's anything we need to do differently, rather than just kind of cross our fingers and hope things are working. It's really important to track that over time. And then how I got into this career is kind of a crazy story. So as I mentioned, my background is not in cybersecurity at all. It's actually in sales and special effects makeup, which completely different worlds.
Yeah.
So how I got into it, my husband had been in IT for years, and he was transitioning into security for a few years. And so he had wanted to go to DEF CON, which is the world's largest hacking conference, for quite some time. And so finally one year he's like, all right, we're going. I'm like, we're going. Again, yeah, not even in that world. I was like, okay, I'll go hang out by the pool, have some drinks, and he'll go do the conference stuff. And so we get there. He's like, I got you a badge. I was like, oh no. What does that mean? Exactly. And so the first talk he was so excited about was malware reversing. Now, someone who has no clue what any of these terms mean, like anything, it was pretty bad. I'm sure the content was great. I just didn't understand that. I actually
It's a hefty topic to go into if you're not known or familiar with cybersecurity.
Absolutely. It was really, really rough. And so I fell asleep. He's like, all right, you can leave if you want. Go do whatever you want. Right? Yes. Yep. He's like, okay. And so I started wandering around, and it was when DEF CON was at the Rio. So it was still one location, and you know, you didn't have to wander too far. And the first place I went into was a lock picking village. And I remember looking up at the sign and thinking, lock picking, like, I don't know what that has to do with cybersecurity. Like it was still, nothing was really registering. And so I walk in, and someone super friendly was like, hey, have you ever picked a lock before? I was like, whoa, no, I have not. I'm like, all right, let's teach you. And so the friendliest person, to this day, I wish I knew who it was so I can thank them. So that's one of, yeah, that's kind of one of those things I always think back when I remember that person. But he sat me down and he's like, all right, this is how locks work. And he was teaching me. And as I was sitting there trying to pick it and play with it, he's starting to kind of weave in how the physical world still kind of intersects with physical security intersects with cybersecurity, right? We have data centers, we have all these things that we're supposed to keep secure and away from attackers, and a lot of it it lives in the physical world. And so, that got my mind turning, and I picked the lock. And there's something so exciting that happens when someone picks a lock. Is like, yes, I did it. But then it's like, oh shit. And they start thinking about everything in their life that has a lock. Their front door, their safe, right? Maybe, their kids, whatever that is, that's supposed to be safe behind this wall and this lock. And you just picked it in like minutes, right? So that really sparked my interest in physical security. So I played there for a little bit. I'm like, okay, let's go see what else they have. I'm getting excited, right? I'm like, okay, there's things here that I like. And I saw the social engineering village. I'm like, I'm social. I have no clue what this means. Maybe this is where people talk to each other. I don't know. And so I go in and everyone's really quiet. Like there's an audience, there's seats and everyone's quiet. I'm like, okay. So I go and sit down. And there's a booth at the front of the room and there's someone in there, like a soundproof booth. And I hear the phone ring. And so the person starts talking to the caller, right? It's played live so everyone can hear it. And they start asking questions. And at the time, like I was trying to understand like what was the point of it, right? And then I hear them start asking about the browser they're using and things like that. I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of see what's going on here. They're asking questions that the person probably shouldn't be giving those answers to. And so they do the call and they did fantastic, and they get out of the booth and everyone starts applauding. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, I can talk. So I'm starting to ask people, I mean, what's going on? And they're explaining it to me like, well, this is social engineering, they're trying to get information from someone over the phone. And as they're explaining it to me, I'm like, oh, I could do this. Like this was made for me. And so I was so excited by it. I remember like sitting there, like Googling all kinds of stuff on my phone as I was listening to the calls. And so I left the conference that year just completely inspired. I bought every book I could on the subject. I started going down rabbit holes. And in my free time, I would just practice, right? I would take my kids to the park and like talk to other moms. I was like, that's probably, that's one way to do it in practice. But like I self-taught, right? There was not a lot of trainings on it. There wasn't that much. So what I did is I read all the books, I practiced it, and I went back the next year and I competed in that competition. Wow. So someone completely not in the industry who just was inspired and wanted to learn. So I actually went back 3 years in a row and competed 3 years. And on the third year, I won that competition.
That's amazing.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
really awesome.
Thank you so much. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I think I can make a career out of this. Like I'm learning so much and I've proven myself, right? Like, so at that point, I started freelancing and my career just took off from there. It's kind of crazy.
Wow. So the first 3 years when you were taking part in, the DEF CON challenges, you were still doing your own gig, right? In different careers that you were in. Wow.
Yep. So at that point, I was doing sales, but then in the evenings, I was just reading as much as I could. And something that I started doing, I think on the second, definitely the third year, is I realized, wow, social engineering was an area I wanted to focus. I needed to know the foundations and the basics of cybersecurity. And that's something, when people ask me, I want to do this for a living, or, how do I do this? I always say start with your fundamentals, your basics, your networking, things like that, because you can't go into this career and not understand those things. I mean, you can, it's not going to be easy for you, right? And especially that helps you provide value to your clients. The more you're able to understand, or even remediation recommendations, right? It's one thing to go in there and be fantastic and get all the information, but if you can't turn around and understand the business side of things and be able to communicate those risks, you're gonna struggle. So that's absolutely one of the top recommendations I have that people don't like to hear, right? They wanna hear like, okay, I just read this book or take this training and I'm a badass. Like, well, you gotta do a little bit more than that.
So what do you think made it easier for you to get into cybersecurity? Because, you kept coming back, right? So what is it that really just clicked in you that, this is probably for me? What made you kept coming back?
That's a great question. So I think it's a handful of things. I think the first one is the job itself is a rush, which I absolutely chase. But looking back at other roles in cybersecurity, I find completely interesting. IR, threat intelligence, like all these other roles. I'm like, oh, I could see myself doing those. Like I still to this day try to learn things like that. But that job is a rush. So that kept me hooked. The second thing, and you're going to learn a little bit about me today, is I am very petty. I had multiple people tell me I couldn't do this for a living. And so I had to
That's
prove
good
them
fuel.
wrong.
That's definitely good fuel to continue on.
Yep. Especially after winning the competition, I went to a couple people in the industry who I had looked up to at the time and said, hey, I want to do this. And I was completely gatekept. Like, you're new, you don't know what you're doing. Nobody hires social engineers. I'm like, okay. I took a second. I was like pretty bothered by it. And like my husband was like, nope, you do not let anyone tell you no. And so that totally fueled me and just propelled me forward.
I love that.
Being petty, have you ever walked back to that person and like, no.
Oh man, no, I want to, but they know, they see me, they know.
Okay. Maybe the high road is better in this case. Just keep on shining, and that's the best thing.
Okay, so social engineering from an employee perspective, for you it's fun, right?
Right.
But you're basically testing employees in different companies. What are the challenges that you face when doing that?
That's a great question. So there's a good handful. One, if you were to put yourself in that employee's point of view, right, that standpoint, they're being tested, a lot of them get really defensive or they get very angry, which I get it, right? I've gotten phishing emails. I fell for phishing emails. Like, I am not perfect. I don't think anyone is. I think anyone can be social engineered. It just takes the right day, the right pretext. But people get really upset when they fell for it. And I get it, but a lot of times I'm on the receiving end of that anger, especially more from like the when we do the physical social engineering. If you see someone face to face, and then later you found out that they conned you, they get pretty angry. So that's challenging. And then sometimes we run into organizations where they just their executive team doesn't care, right? They see social engineering like, everyone's going to click the link. And that's really frustrating, especially when you look at data breaches, and it's still the number one cause of data breaches year after year. And these, some executives just don't care. They're like, it's just phishing. So you need to be looking at this so much more differently.
It's the easiest entrance point into an organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so when you see organizations not care about that, like, it's heartbreaking, honestly. It's like, come on, please, just a little bit of care. So those are probably some of the bigger challenges that employees do feel victimized, right? And that's hard because I see both sides of it, right? Because we have to test to see how they're doing, to see if we need to make improvements. But I think maybe if it was communicated a little bit better by some leadership, like, hey, like letting them know, hey, we're doing these tests so we can see how we're doing. We're not looking at you as a failure. We're looking to see where we can make improvements. And even those improvements might be our email filters. It might not even be you, right? The technology too should be stopping a lot of these kinds of attacks. And I'm going to get on a soapbox here, but companies that buy the latest blinky thing or whatever sells product is in the news this week, that's going to stop everything. They buy it, they plug it in and cross their fingers, but it doesn't work because they're not tuning it, right? You have to tune it, you have to test it. And when you don't do those things, that's when we're able to get in like really, really easy. And that's frustrating to see.
Yeah. And one thing, sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah, no. So one thing that actually struck me out when you mentioned the lack of care from like the board.
Mm-hmm.
Who is it actually that usually hires social engineers? Is it like the management level? Is it more the operational level? So where does the question or the request come from usually?
So it's all over the place. It's normally not the same thing. I've been actually seeing a lot more and more like GRC, right? More from a compliance standpoint.
Yeah.
There's a couple of frameworks where it doesn't necessarily say you have to do phishing testing, but it'll be worded like you have to test your security awareness program. So that's one of the ways we can do it. So when you get more of those style, the check in the box ones, that's where you get the lack of care rather than the clients who are like, all right, we need to see how we're doing. We just made these changes, or the clients that we have that do it, you know, consecutively, like every month they do it, or every quarter we, you know, we help them with it. So it's really not consistent. It's kind of all over the place with what departments are actually hiring us and their end goals too.
Yeah. And when you mentioned about you know, employees getting victimized by the management, looking at war stories, are there some, is there like a memorable one that you can share that will not
Anonymized, of course.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, actually there is one. And so the client they're based in the US, and they wanted us to test all of their locations. They had about 20 locations. And when I say test, I mean physical security. So the goals of it were to see if we can go on to their location, talk to their employees, and see if they would plug in a USB, which we would have some type of malware on it, to see if it would actually execute, and then to see if we can have the employee actually give us any information about the location. So a little bit more high level. Typically when we do physicals, we have like a checklist of 25 different things we can do, but this one was kind of more higher level because we had so many locations and we wanted to just get a baseline. And so I went into the first 4 locations. You know, for me, it went good. For them, it didn't. So you know, they gave me information, they plugged in the USB. And so when I showed up to the 5th location, the manager there was very suspicious. She's like, you said you're with IT, you know, I don't recognize you. And I'm kind of, oh, I'm new, I'm worked for so-and-so. And of course I would name drop someone who I found on LinkedIn. But still, no matter what I was saying, she wasn't buying it. She saw right through me, which happens. And it's nice to see though, right? It's like, okay, someone's onto me. So she was very polite, but she wouldn't give me the information I wanted. I was like, okay, that's great.
Very good.
And so, yep. And so what had happened was I then was driving to the next location. And I think what she did was called around other locations to see if you know, someone had came in. And so she had called the location I was going to next and warned them, say, hey, she's coming. And she had called IT, and IT said, no, we are not sending anyone. So she warned this next location, hey, someone's coming. They're asking for things like they shouldn't be there. So I show up, explain I need to speak with the manager, and they're like, all right, can you wait in the waiting room and can we get your ID? I'm like, that's weird. I've never had anyone ask for my ID before, but I'm like, okay, here's my ID. So they scan it and I go and sit down. I'm like, that was really odd, really odd. So I'm waiting and waiting and waiting a very long time. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get up and go check. And the second I stand up, I see 2 police officers walking my way. I was like, oh shit. So one of the things social engineers have to carry with them is what we call a get out of jail free card. But really it's a letter saying from the client saying, I've hired this company, this person, they're allowed to be on site, they're testing our security, please don't arrest them, pretty much. And so I'm digging through my bag, I pull out the letter, I give it to one of the police officers, and he's reading it. As he's reading it, I'm explaining what I do to the other police officer. And so they hand it off to the manager, who I still haven't spoken with or even seen yet. So it was the first time actually seeing her, and she looks pissed, which I don't blame her. So they're handing it to her to call and validate from her boss. And so as I'm explaining things to them, their reactions could be polar opposite. The first one was like, this is bullshit. Like, anyone can make this letter. And the second was like, you do this for a living? I want to do this. This is so cool. which was really, really interesting to see those two point of views. So she came back and said, okay, I talked to my boss, this is correct. And so they left. And so I stayed with her to kind of walk through things, and it was interesting. So we talked for about 30 minutes, and the course of the 30 minutes, the conversation just went from her being really pissed and angry and almost scared, right? Like she thought someone was coming in to take their data, and she was trying to protect it, which she did tremendously. And the whole time I kept doing, you did exactly what you're supposed to do. Like I was giving her kudos and kind of explaining where things, I could have been stopped at other locations. And so she kind of went from being angry to then seeing the point of the test, to even saying, well, I don't want you to stop, right? I want you to make sure everyone else gets this test, because it's important to know, important to know like where we need training, how many of us managers are failing, because this is important. We don't get this kind of test. And so to see kind of like that chain of events happen, and her reaction kind of once she was able to like breathe and calm down and really think about it, like it set in that, oh, this should be happening. So we kind of, it's a roller coaster, really, this job.
I mean, I guess based on those kind of experiences, that you also need to have a bit of nerves of steel to be able to do this kind of work.
Yep. So I hide mine very well, but I'm not going to lie. Before any on-site engagement, my stomach gets queasy, my hands sweat. Like I get nervous, and I actually teach social engineering now. I teach it every year at Black Hat, and awesome. I tell my students, I'm like, the nerves are what keep you on your toes, right? Wow. I feel like if you don't have those nerves, you're going to be just like too chill or like too cocky. And that's when you're going to get caught. Yeah. You have to have those, because I don't know, there's something about them that I hope they never go away. I have a lot of people say like, oh, aren't you nervous? I'm like, yes, but I kind of love it and need it.
That's interesting. But one question.
Yes.
Have you ever been thrown in jail for this?
Nope. That was the only time that I've interacted with police officers. So I have broken into 132. I recently went back into math, different buildings, and I've only had the cops calling me one time that I know of, that I've interacted with. Wow. I'm sure they've been called and maybe they didn't come by the time I got out. But that is, knock on wood, that's the only time that I've interacted. Yeah.
It's good.
Yep.
So you actually already slightly touched upon skills that you would need as a social engineer, but maybe it's good to elaborate a little bit further. So first of all, you mentioned, of course, nerves of steel, but you also mentioned having a basic understanding of networks, security, etc. What else would you recommend as a necessary skill in order to make it into social engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the people side of things. Understanding your nerves and knowing how to work with them are absolutely important. And then there's two things that I like to put into two different categories. You have rapport building, and then you have influence techniques. So the first thing is rapport building. That is tremendous. And I had a book on my bookshelf, and I think I let someone borrow it. I will send you a link for it, but I have a tremendous book recommendation. But rapport building, that's when you meet someone for the first time and you have that connection, right? It's not awkward. The conversation flows and you actually look forward to talking to them again. As social engineers, we exploit that, right? We know the ways to build that connection with someone. And that is not just a great social engineer skill, that's just a great life skill. So even if you're listening to this, you're like, I'm never going to be a social engineer, still read the book. It's amazing. Especially if you should want to go to an event and network with people. It's tremendous. But the book is, it's not all about me. It's 10 different tips for building rapport with anyone by an FBI behavioral analyst. Nice. Great tips. I'm going to give you one of them right now because it's my absolute favorite. And this one we use all the time in social engineering, and it's called artificial time constraints. So what that means is when you're talking to someone for the first time, and I use this on phone calls a lot, because if you pick up the phone, you're like, who do you want? How, like you just want to know all these answers. And a lot of the time is this conversation going to end soon, or am I going to be stuck on the phone with you? So using artificial time constraints, I would say, hey, this is so-and-so from so-and-so doing so-and-so. This is only going to take 1 minute, right? I'm putting a time on it. or I say, you know, I just have a quick question. Just by those little words right there, it kind of takes the guardrail down a little bit, and people tend to relax because you're like, okay, it's going to be 1 minute, it's going to be 30
Yeah,
seconds.
it's
They
not
only
going to
have
last
two
that long.
questions. Exactly. So that's one of those tips, and it works fantastically. So that's rapport building.
Yeah.
The second one is influence. So once we have that relationship built, then we move on to different influence techniques. So we might want to get more information from someone, or we might want them to do an action for us. That's when we start layering different influence techniques. And I also have a book for that I can send you too. So those, from the people side of things, those two, rapport building and influence techniques, are huge. Physical security is a lot of fun. I think anyone, no matter what their job, should have a lock and lockpick at their desk. It is like the hacker's fidget spinner. I've heard it referred to that, and now I say it all the time. It's very true. Like, it's something that you can do and just practice. I've had times where I've had neighbors that got locked out of their houses, or, you know, just practical use, not where you're actually trying to break into an organization. That's just kind of fun, and it's a nice skill to have. So I think that's an interesting one. But looking at the physical security side of things, there's so many rabbit holes you can go down. Learning about RFID badge cloning is fantastic and super helpful when it comes to physical security. So you can go down rabbit holes there. And then from the technology side of things, a lot of the assessments we do from that side would be phishing. Voice phishing isn't too technical, but there are some things that we work with there. Smishing, or for making payloads for campaigns, right? So I think
just for the viewers that don't know the term, what do you mean?
Yes.
Smishing?
Yes, thank you. So all of your issues have crazy terms. So phishing
Exactly.
is email, phishing is voice phishing, smishing is SMS or text message phishing. I'm pretty sure there's a handful of others, but those are the three we focus on the most. But when you run those type of campaigns, you have to have some basic IT knowledge, right? So especially for phishing, and phishing is getting harder and harder with all of the things that are coming out, right? The email filters and all of the tricks you have to know. So you do have to have, you know, networking and IT and DNS and email and all these kinds of these knowledges. So those are important to have. But if you're wanting to learn social engineering, I would suggest spinning up a free phishing framework like GoFish, Kingfisher. There's so many out there, and just playing with it, right? Learning it. Send an email to yourself, right? Don't send it to someone else, right? We don't want to without a contract. But really just understand how it works, and you'd be surprised at how much it doesn't work and how much you have to go Google. 90% of my job is Googling like errors I get, I swear. But the more you're able to get your hands on with those kinds of tools is really good. And then I think in general, with really any kind, I think you both will agree with me on any kind of cybersecurity consulting. So you have to know the business side of things, right? You have to know what that risk actually means, and then how to communicate it, and what the recommendations for remediation. So those kinds of skills are also extremely important, not just for social engineers, but any type of consultant in this space.
So one thing that also immediately pops up in my mind. So we are nowadays working in a world where almost everything is global. Almost everywhere, people from anywhere are able to work. And I take it that, considering the fact that your work has such a big people aspect, that also culture comes a lot into it, and especially how you interact with people from other cultures and how you deal with them, how you approach them, for example. Can you maybe provide an example of that, if it is what I think it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm lucky enough that I sit on a global team. I think when you look at our IR, our offensive security, and our threat intel groups, I think we're at like 500 people. And so I'm lucky enough where if I know we're sending a phishing campaign to someone in a different country that I'm not familiar with that culture, and you know, any of those little things, I work with someone on my team who I know has either lived there or has a connection to there. And I've been lucky where I haven't run into an issue yet, where it's an area where I haven't been able to pick someone's brain. So you are absolutely right. If I were to come today and send a phishing campaign to someone in Nigeria, like I wouldn't know like the right words to use, or if I'm using the right context or any little thing like that. So I would go to someone on my team and like, hey, like I need help. And that's the thing that I love with my team, and just cybersecurity in general. The community is so willing to help each other. I absolutely love that. So I've been able to leverage different people, even if they're not social engineers, right? Like everyone can add to. And so it's crazy helpful to lean on your team members. And I've been lucky enough that I have a great team where I can do that.
Yeah, really nice.
I guess it's just important to remember that you're not an island, right? You have a team.
Yes.
So just before we wrap up, I'd like to know what your day is like.
That's a fantastic question, because it's never the same, and that's how I like it. I can have a day where I have 6 meetings and they're all an hour long and I want to just take a nap at the end of the day. Or I could have a day where I'm traveling and breaking into a building. That's where I feel like I'm really lucky, because it's all over the place. I think if I were to try to do an average day, I would have some type of leadership meeting. I would have maybe a one-on-one with someone on my team. Mentorship and team building and things like that are extremely important to me in the culture of my team. And then I do a lot of scoping, right? And speaking to clients who maybe haven't had our services. So a lot of education, because there's a lot of misconceptions, or maybe other organizations do things different than we do. So just kind of explaining, this is our take on it. This is the things that we do different, and helping kind of our sales team price things out and things like that. So I kind of have a pretty wide range of things, but I absolutely love that it's not the same.
Fantastic. And before I hand it over to you, Jennifer, one thing that I thought about is because of security awareness being more popular nowadays, right? So every company wants to have a security awareness program, or are mandated to have it based on whatever policies they have. Is your work getting harder?
That's a great question.
Is it just the same?
It is getting harder. So I've been phishing, I think it's been at least 8 years now. And when I started to compare to today, like my average click percent rating is completely changed. Like when I first started, I was looking at 40 to 50% clicks. Now I'm looking at 15 to 20%. So it is getting more difficult, which is yes, it is huge, and it's fantastic to see. It honestly is. Like I kind of sit like right in that road where it's like I want to do really good because it's like me, but then also like I want my clients to do fantastic. And so but it honestly is amazing to see like that much of a difference, and it's going to be crazy to see what happens in 8 more years from now, right? Like who knows? I think there's still a lot of work organizations can do. A lot of training out there could be a lot better, but in general, to see it increase as much as it has is really great to see.
Okay, that's positive news then.
Yes, yes.
Really positive.
Yep.
Fair enough. Okay. So before we fully wrap up, is there anything that you still want to share with our viewers? Anything that you want to give as tips, pointers, things that they need to think of? Anything basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think coming from, social engineering exciting, I want to learn about it point of view. Some of the things I would recommend is those 2 books I'm going to give you the names for. Reading those. If you would like to actually go and practice on people, right, there's ethics involved. I wouldn't say go and get someone's password. Do not do that. However, what I like to do is tell my students, print out a list of questions for password reset. So mother's maiden name, the street you grew up on, high school mascot, those kinds of things, and try to weave those into conversations. Don't do anything with that information, but that's going to help you kind of build that conversation with that kind of security mindset. And that's going to be a fantastic start. From the defending side of things, right? From defending social engineering, I think it's really important to pay attention to like threat intel feeds and see what attackers are actually doing. A lot of times we try to base our attacks off of those, or if we know we're working with a client in a certain industry and they're getting targeted by a certain group, we go and see, okay, what are they doing, right? We want to try to give them the most realistic stuff. So from a defender standpoint, paying attention to what's going on is really important, so you know how to identify and hopefully stop those type of attacks. And then just anyone new to the industry in general, those are, I love those kind of people because they're so excited and wanting to learn everything. My recommendation is learn everything. There's so much in this space. You can never stop learning. Like I said, I Google like 90% of the day, and I try to learn as much as I can, and it's helped tremendously. So yeah, Google is your friend, and learn as much as you can, and that's just going to make you a better consultant, a better researcher, whatever you are. It's just going to improve your skill set tremendously.
And getting lost in rabbit holes is perfect.
Yes, I love it. Yep.
Fair enough. That being said, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. I know I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope Faith did as well.
Same.
I see her not. I see her smiling. So that's good. That being said, to our viewers, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have an idea of a topic that you want us to discuss or want to join the conversation yourself, please feel free to reach out. And yeah, see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.